There's a saying in the Christian faith that no one is more zealous than the newly converted. And I think the realization that I've had over time in my life that sex is not antithetical to Christianity, that a positive idea about sex, even sex outside of marriage, is not antithetical to the Bible and the teachings of Jesus. And that reality was so eye-opening because of my history and so affirming. So now I want to go out and share it with the world, right? So romance novels have a huge platform. I've read romance novels for a long time. They have a huge platform. In the early aughts, the invention of the e-reader meant that anybody could read a romance novel and nobody would know what you were reading. You could read it in the lunchroom. You could read it on the bus. So that opened up romance novels to a much larger audience. Then in around 2019, along with the rest of the country, romance novels went through an awakening around diversity and equality and representation. And now a lot of writers strive to have a lot of diversity represented in their stories. So all orientations, all genders, all races, neurodivergence, female body type diversity. And so that romance novels are this huge platform that's speaking to a lot of people in a way that resonates. So why not use that as a platform to talk about sex positivity, and to talk about when it makes sense to talk about sex positivity also as a Christian. I do have a book that the heroine is a shame culture survivor, and that's my most preachy, if you will, although I try not to have any of them be preachy, but it is reflective of my experience a little bit. It was a bit of a catharsis, and I've had some readers tell me, yeah, reading your book was a catharsis for me too, because I went through what you went through, and seeing this character grow and experience that was helpful for me to put that all down on paper. So I think how I got to writing romance novels is just, again, I wanted to share with the world this idea that sex is a positive thing, and I wanted to express it in a positive way.
That's beautiful. I remember growing up, my mom, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and my mom, Faye Real, God bless her soul, read romance novels nonstop. Like, she always had them around, the Fabio fucking long hair on the cover.
Absolutely.
And I remember when we were younger, she'd be like, leave those alone. She'd kind of like be like, and we let, like, we were going to read them. I didn't know how to read really back then. But as I got older, she stopped trying to hide them, but also her not hiding them released the tension of like, ooh, what is that? What's going on over there? And it wasn't really till I got older that I realized Mom was reading a bunch of smutty stuff, which is amazing. Good for you, Mom. So like growing up, did you grow up religious?
Of course. Okay. Yes, I did.
I was going to say, do you feel like this was an outlet to try to explore maybe some of the sexual misunderstandings that religion can kind of shadow us with the it demonizes it a lot, right? Like, don't touch yourself, don't look at other people, like it's a lot of finger yourself, wagging.
You're gonna go to hell.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. A lot of finger wagging, a lot of, if you do this, you will go to hell, which, by the way, is not what Jesus did. That is not how Jesus talked. That is, what we say, if that ain't in red. So in the King James Version of the Bible, the words that Jesus spoke are usually written in red, as opposed to the rest of the writing is in black. And so sometimes people will say, if people are saying something and attributing it to Jesus that's not accurate, someone might say, well, that ain't in red. That is not what Jesus said, and that is not what Jesus taught. Because so much in the time of the Bible, so much since the Bible, so much has been interpreted and used negatively. And yeah, this was a bit of an opportunity for me to fight some of that negativity. So I grew up religious. I tell people I was born United Methodist. My family, my father was United Methodist, his father, United Methodist forever. Died in the wool. So I grew up in the southeastern United States, which is an oppressive area in a lot of ways, not just racially, but absolutely sexually, um, gender oppression. There's oppressive heat. Like I sometimes joke, pick an oppression, they've got it. So I did grow up in that space where sex was shamed. And now I was also a teenager in the 80s. And remember, the 80s were a time that was marked by the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
Sex was bad. Sex was killing people.
Yep.
Sex was a sin. AIDS was people were saying this on the street, that, AIDS was a punishment from God for people who were doing sex wrong. Right.
Yep.
For gay men, for people who were doing sex wrong. And that's heavy duty stuff. Right. And that culturally, that sparked the 90s, which was the official purity culture movement. But the ideas behind sex being bad, sex being wrong, all that stuff was not new, and not new in the 80s. Certainly, it just sort of intensified in the 80s and then created this purity culture movement of the 90s. Something to remember about the purity culture movement and the ideas around sex, a lot of them held women responsible for sex.
Surprise.
So so I was sort of led to believe, not, no one sort of sat me down and said, this is your responsibility. But it was certainly made clear to me that I could control my sexual urges. Boys couldn't. It was my responsibility to make sure that sex didn't happen. And if the sex did happen, it was my fault. And if I had sex with someone other than my husband, no one would want me. Right. No one would want to marry me. I would be dirty. I would be less than. Those are some pretty heavy things to deal with as a young woman in the throes of puberty, hormones. I was feeling all the things that all the people around me, my age, people going through puberty are feeling. Hopefully we can all think back and remember what it was like. Boys are not the only ones who think about sex a lot during puberty or during life, but certainly as a girl, I was told that I was not supposed to think about that stuff because I wasn't supposed to like it. I wasn't supposed to want it. And girls who did got, good old fashioned slut shaming.
Yep.
So we did everything we did everything we could to avoid that idea. So growing up in that space was harmful, and it continued to harm me. I took a lot of pride in being a virgin when I was in high school. I was doing it right. I was going to church on Sunday and I was walking the walk. I was not just talking the talk. And then I went to college and I got exposed to other ideas and I did things I didn't think I would do. And suddenly I found myself a sexually active, unmarried young woman. And all the things that I was taught about myself made me unworthy of being a Christian and being involved in the Christian faith. And I stepped away from the church, and the church had been such a powerful and important part of my life. My sister used to joke that she used to call me Reverend because I was always talking about the Bible or praying or going to some church youth function. Being a Christian and being involved in church was a huge part of my adolescent life. And so this reality of this crisis of faith, in a way of saying, well, this is the person that I am, that I want to be, and it doesn't mesh with being a Christian. I guess I can't be a Christian anymore.
I want to pause right there and invite everybody who's listening to take a breath, because I just had some major tears well up in my eyes because, and I know you've worked through this, we have had good conversations, but there are so many people that are still facing that today. They're still facing ridicule by family. They're getting ostracized by their communities. There are people, I would probably say more people fighting that battle silently alone. And I just want to take a breath, because what a huge conflict to experience, particularly as a young person, but really at any age, to feel like you now have to choose between the life you've always known that means so much to you and who you really are. And right? Yeah.
You're absolutely right on so many levels and in so many ways, particularly around this idea of sex and religion.
Yeah.
And what right sex is supposed to look like. And really, I shouldn't say all religions, Christianity in particular, because that's the one I'm the most experienced with. And that's what I think I read a statistic, maybe 60 or 70% of people in the United States who are religious claim Christianity as their religion.
Right.
So it's a big deal here and in
And I don't know
the
the
US.
statistics, but I think globally Christianity is a
No, I think actually Muslim.
Muslim. Okay.
Yeah, top.
But it's
religion.
up there.
Yeah, top. I think it's like top 3 or so, top 5, something like that. Yeah, top
Right.
5.
I think the last statistic I heard is about 30% of the world's population reports being Christian. So
Yeah.
it's not the biggest, but it is a big one, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's a
not
lot
the
of
majority, but that's a lot of people. So you're absolutely right that there's a variety of negative experiences, crises that people have that in different ways that circle around this idea of sex and Christianity.
Welcome, love. If you're feeling the pull to remember your power, soften your body, and return to your truth, I invite you into my world of healing arts and transformational coaching. I'm Awa Wild, intuitive guide, energy medicine woman, and creator of Sensuous Revival Healing Arts. I help individuals and couples release old patterns, dissolve shame, reconnect with pleasure, and rise into a more liberated life. Through sacred pelvic healing, somatic practices, intuitive body talk, and emotional integration, you'll learn to listen to your body, trust your intuition, and create relationships that feel nourishing and aligned. Whether you work with me one-on-one, join a retreat, or step into my online program, you'll receive an experience of deep presence, compassionate guidance, and practices that create lasting change. If your soul is ready for more freedom, more pleasure, and deeper truth, I'm here. Learn more at sensuousrevival.com or reach out directly to begin your journey.
I want to speak to something real quick because you brought up young Christianity and young Christians. I grew up in the age of young life. Right, young life was very prevalent in the '90s. Maybe still is. I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't a part of it. I was not a religious person in high school. I was more into the drug side. But that all being
Yeah, I was
said,
confused for a minute. I thought you were saying you were doing Young Life, and I giggled because I was like, "What the fuck?"
nope. I was
Yeah, me either.
adjacent to friends in young life, and the
We
reason
were
I bring it
judging
up,
the Young Life people.
well, the folks that I was friends with had that same idea you were talking about, the purities, right? I'm pure. I'm not going to have sex until I'm married, and all this stuff. And the importance of the woman being the advocate of it's your responsibility because boys can't control themselves. Okay, so that narrative expanded and bastardized to the point of oral sex is okay, anal sex is okay,
Right.
just vaginal sex is not. And so that's for the woman not able to use her vagina, but able to use other 2 orifices. But it totally negates the man's involvement. Either way, the man is having an orgasm because he has one organ to use. It's nothing. Nothing was ever put into that man's head that this is wrong for you and it's wrong for them. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong within the eyes of the religion they're practicing.
Right. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not stigmatizing sex. Please, responsibly have all the sex you want, right? But again, it's just like in those contexts, these kids were so. Like, I don't know if one would say brainwashed is the right word, but they were just so misguided in the understandings of what they had because they're still trying to follow their hormones. And so, like, here's the rules. And just as kids do, here's the adjacency to where I can break these rules because it doesn't verbatimly say that I can't do this.
There's loopholes everywhere.
Exactly, right? And so, like, we're totally like, and we're watching the natural progression of adolescents and teenagers, and young adults doing this because we're like, let's figure out, like Awa said, the loopholes. But in a way, I celebrate that because the world is full of loopholes, and if you get good at finding them, then you're going to be really successful in a lot of ways. But it's totally bastardizing the idea of what the religion is. And when you really dial it down into what the religion is, it's not sex negative. It's very sex positive. It's just the way that it's being presented. So, like, did you have like people in your life that showed the potential positivity of sexuality within Christianity, like a reverend or a youth minister or something like, or maybe even just like a friend in the group that you guys could just like BS with about like what you felt true sexuality or sexual nature was?
Right. I think actually, yes. the talking about loopholes, it could be argued that I read the Bible so feverishly when I was an adolescent because I was looking for a loophole to the things that the pastor and the youth leaders were telling me. I'm like, this cannot be right. Like, I cannot feel this way. I cannot be created by my creator to feel this way and it be wrong. Like, that is just does not make sense to me at all. And I've got to figure out how this makes sense.
Snap to that.
Right. But speaking more to your question, I think what happened, it wasn't particularly around sex as a topic. What I started to do is learn the realities and some truths about the Bible and the people who wrote it, the time the Bible was written in, the people who have been interpreting that scripture since, and what their politics were, what the patriarchal influences were, what the power dynamic was in the space between the time the Bible was written, the reality and today, and the reality of things that are in the Bible that we don't talk about. Like the entire book of Song of Songs. It is predominantly written from the female perspective about her lover. It's pretty graphic, and they do not say anything about being married. Most preachers will not touch that book with a 10-foot pole because they can't make sense of it in this concept of sex negativity that we're trying to push on the world. There are female disciples that are mentioned in the Bible, but we don't hear about that. We hear about the 12 who were the men. Jesus, the longest conversation recorded in the Bible that Jesus had with someone was a woman, and that's the woman at the well. And if you're familiar with the story, Jesus goes to the well, which at the time, the well was kind of the meeting place. The women would all go to gather water at the well. And so a man showing up at the well was a little questionable. What are you doing here? Right? This is a woman's space. He was a little bit like a pickup joint, but it was unusual for a dude to be showing up at the well, right? So here comes Jesus, and he's showing up at the well, and he starts talking to this woman, and he wants to let her know that he is special, that he knows her, and she says, you know, something about her husband, and he says, you aren't married, and the man, like, you've been married 5 times before, and the man you live with now is not your husband, and she says yes. And I was taught that scripture was that she was a whore. She'd been married 5 times and now she was living with a guy. Come on, that can't be good. But when we learn about the reality of the situation at that time, women had no power to divorce. She did not divorce anyone. They divorced her. And remember that at this time, marriage for a woman was survival.
Yeah.
It's only been in the last 150 years that marriage has been about love. Right. Before that, marriage was about survival, ownership, and passing down of the bloodline. It was having children and passing the bloodline down. It was about property, transfer of property. So here you have this woman at the well.
Us being the property.
Yes, women being the property. Yeah. Women being the property. So here you have Jesus. He's having this long conversation with this woman who has been victimized over and over and over. And Jesus says, I see you. And he doesn't judge her. He doesn't say, this is something that's wrong with you. After being taught for years that this woman is a whore, and now understanding she is a victim by society, and that Jesus is seeing her and acknowledging her and talking to her, taking risks to talk to her. She is important. And that was so powerful for me to learn, right? That is so contrary to what I was taught about women and their importance when it came to Christianity and the Bible.
That message is so huge, just like in the world of how society judges so many people and what it means in the realms of healing and the offerings given. When we show up, what I heard you just talking about was he loved her, like he was loving her. To be loved when you live in a culture that says you're unlovable, that is the healing for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, if you look at the entire theme of the Bible, it is particularly the New Testament and Jesus's teachings, it is about love. Jesus never said anything about who we're supposed to marry, who we're supposed to have sex with, and under what circumstances. Jesus told us to love each other.
Yeah.
That is it. You know, the book of Matthew is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and he talks about lots of stuff and rules. And the people there, some of the Sadducees, which were sort of the religious zealots of the time, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they wanted to trick Jesus, and they asked him, you know, well, we have all these rules in the Jewish faith about not doing this on the Sabbath and not eating this. And I think there's like 670 something rules. And the people were like, which ones of these should we follow? And Jesus said, no, there's a better way. And he gave the Sermon on the Mount, which is essentially kind of a retelling of the 10 Commandments. And the people were like, but which one is most important? And Jesus was like, people. Okay, you can't. Okay, I narrowed it down from 670 to 10, but still, you can't handle that. So here we go. We're going to go with 2. Let's see if you can do 2. Love the Lord your God above all else and love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was kind of like, see if you can do that, you know? Yeah. And, I'm embellishing here on Jesus's attitude. I have no idea if that's how he felt, but it kind of probably he did. The human side of him was probably like, people.
Like, really? Is this what we're doing?
Yeah.
Right? This is what we're doing. So, Jesus was all about love and loving people. And yes, seeing the woman at the well, he loved her. He did not judge her. That was not what Jesus was about. Jesus was basically about loving people and fighting empire, because empire harmed people and shamed people and controlled people. And so Jesus was about fighting empire and loving people. And when I started to learn about, that makes so much more sense than about, the things I had read, this idea that Jesus is about love, really only about love, and that people who came after him, like Paul, a prolific writer of so many letters in the Bible, and a lot of the content of those letters has been taken, verses have been taken out and used to control women in particular, and to say, this is what marriage is supposed to be, and this is what sex is supposed to be. And again, those things are, as we say, not in red, and also not consistent with what Jesus was teaching about love and acceptance. And so we kind of I was taught to sort of look at the Bible as a whole, look at the teaching of Jesus as a whole. Does this verse that says, hey, dudes, your women, they shouldn't talk in church. Don't let women talk, and women shouldn't be teaching you what to do. Is that consistent with Jesus's message of love and respect for all people? No, it really isn't. So let's see, is there another interpretation? What else is going on in the story? Who is the letter writer writing to? What was going on in that place? And then I started to just learn the truth about some of these verses that were used to harm and control and shame, that taken in the broader context, that's not what they're about. They were pulled out and used in a way that controlled people or shamed people. And that has become the ubiquitous understanding of that verse, when in reality, that verse was likely not intended to say that women shouldn't talk in church. Right. What was happening, Paul was writing to the people, the letter of Timothy, it is believed that Paul was writing to the people on the Isle of Crete. The women were very educated. They were asking a lot of questions during services when the disciples and the preachers would come to talk about Jesus. And it was kind of disruptive. So they were kind of like, guys, can you go home and tell your wives what's happening so that they're not always asking questions too? Like we just need one group of people asking questions because we have only a limited number of time, or limited amount of time. It wasn't about women are not important enough to speak in church, or not worthy to speak. That wasn't what it was about. But
so when we go back though, so like you were chatting about you coming to that realization when you were going to college, and I love the stories that integrate all of that. But I want to go back to when you started having this realization that like God didn't create you to have this magnificent body with all of these sensations and your relationship to sex. And you grew up in this faith and you started diving down and doing the research to learn how we'll just air quote here, the word was starting to change based on interpretation.
Mhm.
What was your personal experience like at that time with the relationships you were having with your family, the relationship that you were having with your church, and even maybe your sexual relationships? Like, how were they informing each other? And what would you say maybe was like the most difficult aspect of that?
That's a great question. I have to think a minute. I kind of got sidetracked with all my Bible stuff,
It's okay.
which I want to do. Um, the point with all that is, like, as I started to learn about that these Bible verses were not necessarily being used correctly, that opened up my mind to the idea that Bible verses that told me sex was bad or
Totally.
wrong
Yeah.
were also not great. And that has been more of a recent, in the past decade, decade and a half, realization. So went to college, became an unmarried sexually active adult, had to deal with that. There was the United Methodist Church across the street from my college had an incredible preacher at the time who was really just he preached in a way that was so accepting and so loving. And he had a bunch of college students.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a dummy. He is not going to stand up there and say, you're going to hell if you drink or if you have sex. Like, he was not saying that the quickest way to get everybody to walk out of your church is to do that when your church is filled with a bunch of 20-year-olds, right? So he preached from a very, I think, authentic way, and that was helpful in my progress. And then I found my way back to church, and I started exploring that I could be a Christian and also be a sexually active young adult. Obviously, I needed to be responsible. I want to be responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do things that were in line with what I felt was my value. My family doesn't talk about sex. My immediate my parents, like, that's not something that was talked about. So it was not really an issue for my family. And I'm not the only person in my family who had sex outside of marriage. Come on.
Right.
I knew that. They knew that. Let's just not confront each other over iced tea about it. Let's just leave it. And so it wasn't really an issue in my family relationships. Then I got married to a wonderful, amazing person. And but I still struggled with shame. I have a committed partner. I hope this isn't revealing too much, but he likes sex.
Yeah.
And I do too. I did not get his permission to share that with you all, so please use your grace. But yeah, he likes sex. I like sex. But it was something that I was, I kind of not struggled with, but didn't really enjoy in the same way that I think I was supposed to. Something was kind of missing, because I was always like, oh, what does my body look like? And, oh, am I doing this right? And so then, we had kids, and, then you barely have sex when you have when your kids are little. You're sort of like, oh, we got 5 minutes. Let's see what we can do in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so there was very little
Sleep.
not a lot of room for passion and romance and contemplation. Then, as we got older, kids got older, I went through menopause pretty early. In my late 40s, I went through menopause, and we don't talk about what the experience of menopause is like. There's a lot of complications, but one of the main complications is a dip in sexual desire, which is very common with the hormone changes. And so my husband is a scientist. And what does a scientist do when they're faced with a problem? Research.
Yay.
So we researched, like, what the hell is going on? And so I started to, meanwhile, I've been reading romance novels about passion and giant dicks and how magical they were. And, I've been, reading all of this stuff over here about sex. And then I'm going to church every Sunday and learning that Jesus is about love and the Bible is about love. And some of this stuff that I've been taught is not really real or right. And then I'm reading over here about sex positivity and how sex can be so great. And a lot of people, even some of the people that report having the best sex, are in their 50s and 60s because in long-term relationships, because they've developed the trust. I'm like, what is trying to put all this together? I'm like, what is happening? So that's kind of how I really leaned into the sex positivity. I mean, my husband has a degree in psychology. I have a degree in psychology. We've both always been curious about human behavior. We've always read those books about lots of different things, and we recommend stuff back and forth. We leaned pretty heavily into the sex stuff as I was struggling to come out of menopause.
Yeah.
And it was super fun. So now we've consistently stayed on that track. And the more that I learn, the more that I want to talk about it. So the most difficult thing, I think the most difficult thing was being a 40-year-old and realizing I was still being influenced by the things that I was taught at a visceral level, not instead of what I knew in my head, my body was I still felt shame. I still felt that if I wanted sex, that was bad. I still had those sort of visceral reactions to the way that I was brought up and the ideas that I was taught about sex.
Yeah.
I think calling that shame out. Shame only flourishes in secret, in the dark, in private. If you call it out, it cannot live. And so calling out that shame, owning it, and saying, I'm choosing something different. I understand why the culture felt it necessary to do this to people. I don't agree with it, but I understand why it happened. I'm going to choose a different path. I'm going to do something different.
I love that, because I think when we even talked was you sharing some of the conversations that you get to have at church, right? So one of the questions that I want to ask you here and be able to have you share with the listeners is, what is the impact that you're having now, having gone through all of that and doing the research? And I love that you have a psychology background and that your husband does as well, because that's like, it feels like then what you are producing is not just a personal preference or an idea. It's actually founded on your own personal experience, but also just science and human nature, right? So
Right.
when you are writing these books, well, I guess there's two questions. We'll start with the first one. Like, how do you feel like this is directly impacting the Christian community
That I'm in? Yeah. So it was funny. I run a meeting, but then I kind of contribute to it going off the course. And so me saying that I run this meeting sometimes is difficult, but I run a meeting at church. Yesterday we met, and it's a weekly meeting, and I mentioned to them that I was going to be on this podcast, and I asked for their prayers and, just support so that I could say something. I said, I just don't want to say anything that makes Christianity look worse. I just don't want to, I just don't want to do anything, that makes it look worse. There's so much crap right now. And the energy in the room was up, and people were like, well, let us know when this is released, we want to hear it. A lot of support and positivity. I'm really active in my church. I'm what's called the lay leader, which is laity in a church. Is in the United Methodist denomination, laity is anyone who's not ordained. So anyone in the church that's not ordained would be considered laity. I'm the lay leader. So I'm like the one that represents all of the laity in decisions that the church might make. So it's an appointed position for 3 years, actually. And it's kind of a big deal. It's an important position, and so I don't take it lightly. And everybody knows that I write sexy, steamy stories. And I'm the lay leader of this church. Right. So, in some cases that would not fly.
Yeah.
I think there's that. I do think, for better or for worse, I'm not ashamed or afraid to talk about sex. I try to be respectful of people's space and journeys and where they are. I don't, walk up to people and start talking in graphic language. I did at one time say to our district superintendent, which is like our pastor's boss, kind of one step below the bishop. Like, it's a big point. It's a big person. And we were talking about something. And I said, well, the clitoris's only purpose is sexual pleasure. Why would the creator give women this organ that he had never intended for us to use? That doesn't make any sense. And then I realized I just said clitoris to the district superintendent. It was sort of like, whoops, is that okay? Can I say that? Is that sexual harassment? I'm not sure.
Right.
So but I continue to say those things and do those things as appropriately as possible, because I think part of the problem is that we don't talk about sex. We don't talk about body parts. We talk about vagina. The vagina is just where the penis goes. Vulva is what we need to be saying. But we talk about vagina because that's where the penis goes. So it's obviously the most important part, right? Not when it comes to a woman's pleasure. And so, like, we need to say things like vulva. We need to say things like clitoris. These are just body parts. They're not, it's arm, foot, vulva.
Yeah.
Same difference.
We don't avoid saying fingernail because it's weird. It's just a part of the finger. I don't even like that the English language divides the part between vagina and vulva. Like, there are a lot of other cultures where it's all one system, and anybody in my world knows the word yoni, right? It's one whole system. But it's interesting because, and I'm not by any means criticizing you saying this. I completely respect and understand where you are, and I love what you're doing. But even when you say words like, is this appropriate? That's still our conditioning, right? Like the fact that we have to worry about using an anatomical term about the part of our body and wonder if it's, you know, I know you're tongue in cheek saying is this sexual harassment, but that is a reality for a lot of people. You cannot say those things and not get weird looks or uncomfortability or, you know, offense taken.
Right.
So,
right. And I mean, I just sort of try to be mindful and meet people where they are, because if they write me off as some, you know, sexual radical, they're not going to listen to anything I say.
right.
So, you know, if I can be respectful and try to respectfully meet people where they are, then maybe that's a better way to do it. But I mean, obviously I want to be in people's faces. Sometimes I'm good about it. Sometimes I'm not. I recently was in a meeting and it was all men. I was the only woman in the meeting. And I was like, this is a real sausage fest up in here, guys. You know,
Good for you.
And I was like, what happened that I'm the only woman here? And there were some construction workers in the meeting and they did not make a face at all. And then, I mean, they were all, everybody was so, I think everybody was we're standing in the sanctuary when I said it. And I think everybody was sort of like, did she just say sausage fest in the sanctuary? You know,
There's so much fear.
Right. You know, there's so much. And then afterwards, it was funny. I said one of the gentlemen who I know, we were looking at some things we're redoing our sanctuary. We were looking at some different articles, things to, I can't think of the word, but we were looking at these different panels and one of them was called Naughty Pine. And he looked at me and he goes, this is called naughty. just laugh. You know, I loved that he felt comfortable making what would probably be sort of an innuendo to me, but because I knew him, he knew me. Like I laughed out loud, and then I looked at the other people. I was like, "This is naughty." And then, you know, I said to some people that didn't know me, you know, I work in sexual health. I talk about sexual health, so this is all like totally normal for me. But I could tell that they were all the people that were sort of new in this meeting. They were kind of like, "What is happening?" And so I felt afterwards, I felt a little like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have been so out and about with it. And I said something to my husband, and my husband's like, no, you didn't say anything inappropriate. You called out the situation. It was a sausage fest. Now, a completely innocent, it became a sausage fest in a very innocent way, but it was.
Right.
Let's just be honest. And so he's like, no, I don't think that was bad. But I hear what you're saying. It's not great that I always have to sort of think about what I'm saying, but I don't want to make someone feel uncomfortable to the point where they feel like I've just made it worse.
Well,
right?
I think it's important.
Christianity worse.
Yeah, because I mean, the reality that I understand about human psychology is that if people are going to grow, they have to first feel safe. And so if you're meeting them where they are, and then you take them out, especially through comedy helps people laugh, it regulates your nervous system, and then your mind can expand. But if we try to stretch people too far, there's the immediate resistance. They're going to shut down and they're not going to learn anything. So I think that is a beautiful way of being able to help people see things maybe a little bit differently.
Yeah, the kids call it code switching.
What is it?
Kids call it code switching.
Oh, yeah.
So you can, you know, because, you know, and as a male yoga teacher, I have the possibility to offend a lot of people and to be in a lot of people's spaces that might not want me there, right? And it's a very female, at least in the Pacific Northwest, very female heavy, practice. And so for me, like, I got to make sure the people around, I don't have to, I choose to make sure the people around me feel safe and feel comfortable. And so sometimes if it's a dude and I'm familiar with that guy, I'm going to come up and I'm going to be a guy that's familiar with the guy. If it's a woman that might be in a posture that I don't really know, but is in a posture that she's going to hurt herself, I need to go up there and help her, but also not be like, put my hands on you, be aggressive, do this, do that. It's like, hey, here's the back of my hand. Here's a finger, push your knee that way, right? So I got a code switch to make sure that they feel safe and I'm not just rushing in there. But and I just want to speak to something real quick and just get your opinion on something, because Ava's brought it up a couple times about, the verbiage that we use and the soft shoeing around certain topics and things like that. And a long time ago, and I'm not a religious person, I grew up with a little bit of Catholicism, Christianity, and baptism in the South. And when you say red, your South comes out real hard.
Yep.
And I love it in red. I got it. I got
I
you.
mean, in rated.
Yeah, that's Tennessee right there, girl. I get you. I'm from Houston.
Yep,
I got you. But one of the things that I was told a couple years ago was, and I was researching religion and dogmas and all this stuff, is that one of the reasons why we have these clerical positions in the religions, one is because the word of God is so convoluted and we needed, but also it's as an intermediary, because we need to start guilting the people that can naturally talk to God. And how do you naturally talk to God? Through an orgasm. We can all have an orgasm. And when we have an orgasm, we connect to the spirit, the holy divine. And that's a theory, right? I'm not going to say this is like underline exclamation point, this is what's fucking happening. But there is that theory, is when we have an orgasm, we connect to God. And so we had to have people come along to say, no, we can't freely talk to God. You got to go through somebody. So I'm going to demonize sex so that you don't just touch yourself and fuck whoever you want to. You've got to go to church and talk to the person in the robe with the hat and the fucking funny cross guy. That's the guy you talk to talk to God. You can't directly talk to God. That's not allowed anymore. And so I think in those thousands of years ago, when religion was being developed, there might have been an understanding or a reason why. We have fucking no idea. But it seems like the now folks like yourself and the people that you work with are having to deal with that backhanded, behind the fucking closet kind of moniker banter, when it's just like penis, vagina, what the fuck? Why can't we just talk about sex now? Like, what vulvas and shit, right? But we're having to be like, oh, sorry, I said clitoris in front of a guy with a funny hat. Fuck, man. Like, where am I? Why can't I do this
He
shit?
didn't explode.
Right,
he didn't
exactly.
explode. And I think he's married, so I would hope to the good Lord that he knows what one is. So, it wasn't a trauma, but so a couple of things there. So remember that when was the printing press invented? 1400s?
I think so, yeah.
So it was before the 1400s, the only people that learned about the Bible they only learned it from people that had the funny hats on. So the people with the funny hats got to decide and say, well, this is the Bible verse and this is what it means.
Right.
And I'm sure that most of those people were altruistic and fabulous, but some of them were not. Some of them were human and made probably mistakes for the wrong reasons. Money and power being those reasons.
Guilt and shame.
Augustine, who was super dude in the history of the church, 400 CE, he had a problem with women and sex workers. And when he converted and became a Christian and started to preach and teach, a lot of the stuff, his interpretations did not paint women in a good light. And that was where a lot of the women negativity stuff can be kind of traced back to. So we have to remember that, again, sometimes I think we look at the Bible and we think it was written yesterday or it was written at a time thinking about what life would be like now. This is what marriage is about, love and commitment. And anybody has access to biblical teaching and can read for themselves. And people can go on spiritual walks and journeys and feel connected with God through orgasm or nature or what else. We think but that's not what was happening when the Bible was written, and it's not what has happened since. So I think I forgot what your question was, but that I think I think what you touched on there is we have to remember that, yes, the dudes with the funny hats, that for a long time, that was the only message that people got. And so now we are living in a bit of a renaissance. It's only been in the last 50 years that women, last 50 years to 100, that women have been ordained and allowed into those spaces to say, you know what? I think the woman at the well was a victim, not a whore.
Yeah.
And I think it was a woman who first made that connection, or at least made it publicly. So, like, this is a bit of a renaissance for how we're interpreting the Bible and what we're learning. And I think sex and power dynamics among sexes and genders, I think that's all wrapped up. It makes sense that all that stuff is happening now.
Do you find that when you go to church now that there's still things that people up on the stage are saying that make you cringe? And if that happens, what do you do about it? Do you do anything?
So not my church, not my church. I'm super fortunate to have a really incredible pastor, and he'll probably listen to this podcast. So I have to say, he's really, no, I don't have to. He is great. And he is actually one of the people that I've learned a lot from about the Bible. And he is one of the ones that I would say is a huge influence on my learning and openness to the idea that the things I've read in the Bible are not the way that everybody said they were.
Yeah.
So I think he would probably be devastated if he said something that I had a problem with, I have a relationship with him because of my lay leader position. I can go up to him and say, you did not just say that. You need to go say something different. And like today, but he's a pastor. I am not. He's ordained. I am not. And so I guess there's a part of me that would probably be like, I shouldn't go up to him and say, you need to say something different, because it's not his job to do what I tell him to do. And I'm not going to blackmail him into it. But that just doesn't happen in my church. Now, I think when I hear people say things, and I do have an extended family that has said things to me in the past that are just inconsistent. I try to be, number one, I try to be respectful of their situation. A lot of my family grew up in churches that told them women can't talk in church, told them that women were bad and sex was bad. These things are all bad. I cannot go in and blow the foundation out of all of that. If the guy behind the pulpit was saying this and it's wrong, what else has he told you that's wrong? And that could send them down an existential tube that they don't want to go, right? And so I sort of have to be mindful of how critical I am, because this is what their lives are founded on. But I try to be somewhat surgical and precise in saying, I don't believe that, and here's why. And trying to sort of leave it. I cannot change them. I will not change them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that I need to. I don't know that I need to. So when I'm confronted with someone who thinks differently or says something differently, I try to be respectful of where they're coming from. And then I try to say, I don't agree, instead of you're wrong. I don't agree.
Yeah, this is
That's
my
not what I've read.
perspective.
That's not how I interpret it. And try to allow space for them to continue to interpret it the way they want to. It's problematic when if they start to use that to hurt people. An example, if they vote in a way that's harmful based on ideas that are religious, that are not actually what I think are very Christ-like. We have a lot of people who claim to be Christians right now, running around in the world, acting very un-Christ-like.
Yeah.
That I'm not perfect. I'm not Christ-like by any means. So maybe I'm one of those people, but we have a lot of Christians running around in the world acting very un-Christ-like.
I think that's such a impactful thing. Like when you were talking about how a lot of churches are shutting down now, right? Like there's this which is interesting because I just was listening, I think it was Scott Galloway, and I was listening to a short talk recently where he was talking about more people are going back to church, but it's not for the reasons we think. It's not because they're genuinely interested necessarily in their religion. It's because they are desperate for community. And a lot of times when people are desperate, they will take on belief systems maybe that don't genuinely resonate from their heart, but they want to be part of a collective gathering space. But, I've had an interesting upbringing with religion. My dad's side of the family was Catholic. My mom never really talked about God. I would say, if anything, I grew up feral. Nature was God for me and my teacher, and I come from a long ancestral lineage of pagans for sure. And so for me, there's been the experience of being part of a religious community that to all of the perspectives in which I experienced was very unattractive. They were not kind. They were not loving. They were abusive. They were fake, Monday through Saturday. And then the faces that they put on for Sunday was just terrible. So when I started to get to have my own opinion, it was mostly fuck religion and fuck the people who follow it. And so when I was a young adult and a young mother and started to get sober, I was being asked to believe in something more powerful than myself. And I was like, I'm good. I'm pretty strong. I've gotten myself through a lot of things. And I think that what's interesting is Adam had asked the question earlier, like, were there other people in your life that were kind of helping you see a different perspective or be able to have an ability to carry your belief system that you had been steeped in, but see it being practiced differently? I didn't have that. Well, that's not true. I had it, but it wasn't so obvious. I call him my soul dad. He was my mom's boyfriend for a very long time when I was young. He would take me to like Unitarian churches, and he was a major hippie. So like at home, we were listening to Henry Rollins and like, just like this very eclectic type thing. And then this family I got really close to as a young girl, I was their first babysitter. They identified as Christians, but they were also selling drugs and fighting dogs. And they would bring me to their church, and I could feel something I couldn't name, and I would cry every time. But I just also was like so resistant to the idea of becoming part of any of like, I'm air quoting here, those communities. So,
Right.
Fast forward, I'm in therapy. It comes to light that I should probably get sober. I start going to AA, and I feel like this group of people is like, you need to believe in God. And I was like, no, I don't. And I thank goodness or thank God, whichever, it's all the same to me. I had a woman.
It's all the same.
Yep. She said, you know what? Why don't you just try practicing believing in that doorknob? Because without it, you can't get through that door. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try that. And then I had another woman that said, I look at the clouds and that's where I feel a sense of, God or whatever. And so I had all these people making these random suggestions. And a lot of it was like, fake it till you make it. But at the same time, I had a therapist, and she started talking to me about all the times where I thought I was in control and I wasn't. One of them being I was drinking and driving, and I hit what are those metal things on the side of the road so you don't fall off?
Oh, guardrail.
Guardrail. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Perimenopause. I hit a guardrail.
Up top.
Yep. And I bounced off, and I was on the freeway. I was going, I don't know, I was probably going somewhere between 60 and 70 miles an hour. And I was so intoxicated that by the time I reached my destination, which was maybe 8 minutes later, I had forgotten it had happened. And I went to get out of my car door, and I couldn't open the door all the way. And so I had to crawl out of my passenger side, went in, passed out, woke up the next morning. And then I saw somebody standing outside my car looking at it. And I was like, oh no, I forgot. Right. So I'm telling this story to my therapist, and she looks at me and she goes, tell me that wasn't God. And that was what changed my mind, to start recognizing all of the times that I could have been dead, that something worse off could have happened. And it was just a cracking of the door. And that's all it needed, was like just something to open up my mind to start to consider that I wasn't actually in control, and that I could start to be curious about the idea that there was something beyond helping me. Never mind the fact that I have had visions of Jesus my entire life. And so it took quite a few many years later for me to make Jesus my homie. But, to go back to what I was referencing, is there's a lot of people out there that, like you said, are living lifestyles that are not in alignment with love. They're not in alignment with befriending your neighbor, right? When I think of neighbor, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a hot topic right now.
Mhm.
And it breaks my heart because I think that there could be so much more healing for people to have. My old babysitting people, regardless of the choices they were making, they were so loving to me. They cared for me when nobody else would. There could be people like my counselor who was like, let's look at some of these things and just like helping us, like you were saying, meet people where they're at. If somebody were to come up to me at any stage of that chapter of my life and be like, you need to believe in God or you're not going to get better, I would have been like, fuck you. I'm good. I don't need your shit.
Right.
And so I'm really grateful to meet other people who are willing to sit in the uncomfortability, recognizing, and particularly you saying like, it's not my job to change them, right? But will you sit with someone long enough for them to feel comfortable, to be curious, to explore? Because you don't have to call it God. You don't have to call it Jesus. You know, it's
Right.
not a, for me anyway, it's not a dogmatic thing. You don't have to join my cult to be cool.
Well, and you guys are familiar with yoga. My yoga teacher is probably the most loving person I have ever met. Like she just sort of radiates this love, and she has two kids, and sometimes I'm just like, how? You have two kids that my kids drove me up a tree a lot of the time. Like, how do you have two kids and a husband and a job and a business, and you are this gift of love to the world, gift of light and love in every single way? She and her family are Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe, and she talks to me about part of the yoga lesson. The yoga practice is usually a lesson from something about one of the gods that's maybe in season at that time, or maybe what's happening in the earth that's related to a particular Hindu god. And it struck me that it's really not that different from what I believe.
Yeah.
And Native American, what I know about Native American beliefs and ideas, what I've heard about in my limited secular view. So please know that I admit that it's a limited secular view, as I'm not Native American. But what I have learned about it seems very consistent with my faith. There's so many things that are consistent. To say that there's one religion that's true and right is not my belief.
Yeah.
And I have talked to ordained people who also believe that, and also point to Bible verses that say this is why we believe this, and it's okay. It's not, it's not against the Bible to say that there are a lot of different religions and a lot of different faiths, and they're all valid and important and likely the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really beautiful. And you talk about opening the crack. Some people will have one of those experiences like, oh, God was with me, or they saved my child. My child was miraculously saved, and now I believe, right? But not everybody has those. Some of them are just that simple belief that you're not alone. Some people just look for Jesus and look for God and find the creator in the stream.
Mm-hmm.
And that is perfectly fine. We're all connecting to the creator in our own way. If God intended us to believe the same things and do the same things and see him the same way, he would have created us in a way that we would do that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how he created us. And so why are we fighting this idea of how we were created?
Right. Well, with that, that parallel to like a yogic culture, which is, not always, but has a lot of Hindu overarching, with the deities and stuff like that. And I love, because, again, I didn't grow up religious, but as I've gotten older, I've adopted, more of a spiritual practice, and I'm really drawn to Hinduism and just like the colorfulness, the amount of gods and deities and all this. Just it makes, I don't know, it's exciting to me. I love a good story, and when I talked to my Catholic and Christian friends about like my excitement with Hinduism, they're like, it's confusing. There's too many gods. There's too many guys. Everybody does something. Da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, I get that, but there's also, yeah, okay, we have one God, but we also have Jesus. And then I say we, there is in Christianity. And then there's all these fucking apostles and there's all these saints and there's all these, it's the same fucking thing. If I lose something, I pray to St. Anthony, St. Anthony, St. Anthony, turn around, St. Anthony, St. Anthony, something must be found. That's not God, that's not Jesus, but it kind of is. Just like, Lakshmi is also Vishnu, which is also Brahma, which is also fucking Shiva, right? They're all the same. It's just, how do you want to look at it? Right. And so with all of the, with the Christianity that you hold, the yoga practices that you've done, just like the amount of information you pull in, have you found a sex positive approach to spirituality or a connection to the divine it doesn't even need to be mainstream, but just something that's a little more out there that's like tantric work or kundalini, those are very spiritual practices, but
I think I am not as committed to Tantra as I should, as I probably could benefit from. No, I don't want to say should be, but I think for me, the most spiritual religious component is the acceptance, and that sex is, a lot of tantric practitioners believe that orgasm is an exposure to the divine energy. And I agree with that. I think that the incredible feeling, and I do know that there are some people who aren't able to orgasm for biological reasons and other reasons, and I hope that they are finding a connection to the divine energy in other ways. But during sex and sexual pleasure, but I do believe that the experience of orgasm is so powerful and effective, and that is the link for me personally between the divine and sex positivity. But also I think just the acceptance of what I like to do in the bedroom. Some people might not think that what I like is okay, and accepting that this is what I like and it is okay. I'm like this for a reason, and it is not antithetical to God, so there's that sort of sex positivity. That's sort of the sex positivity thing, acceptance of who I am when I show up in the bedroom. That's been a big part of it for me, but that's my personal journey. I think, other people probably have different experiences.
Yeah.
I love that though, because it's foundational, as someone who considers herself as a tantrika, my spiritual practice absolutely influences my relationship to pleasure, and my pleasure influences my relationship to life. And so, you're talking on some points that I love. Emily Nagoski, who wrote the book Come As You Are, for anybody who's listening.
Big props. If you have a vulva or you care about vulvas at all,
one.
or can relate to one or care about them in any way, shape, form, or fashion, read Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are. Just life altering.
Well, and even just any sexual being who needs to understand the systems of arousal, right? And what I was going to say in the reference of her book, I don't know if she coined the phrase, but I quote her often, is like, never yuck anyone's yum. And as long as my practice isn't hurting myself or anyone else, and I do like to be inclusive of the kink and BDSM world that's non-consensual, then there's no place for judgment, right? And like referencing going back and becoming this young woman who is finally exploring the dynamics of your body and your system and relationship to another, or even solo, and then feeling that conflict, there's these opportunities for us to genuinely understand, if I love and accept myself, which is what Jesus is asking me to do, then it doesn't mean that I have to be separate or othered, which is the fear of anybody, right? We don't want to be othered. I'm curious, with the writings of your book, and my apologies, we only were introduced like a month or two ago, and I have not had a chance to read any, but I am now very excited to. When you're writing in these erotic ways and these inclusive ways, what kind of relationship do you have, and are you exploring outside of your own ideas and realms, particularly around the more erotic aspects of the relationships. And I don't want to be like, are you only writing about yourself and what you do with your husband? Like, that's not the specific question, but like, I have one of my favorite side hobbies, which I don't do very often, is writing erotic story, or I like to do like erotic poetry.
Mhm.
And I would say that anything that I'm writing from is usually coming from my own mind. And it may be more of a fantasy and not necessarily a desire. And I do want to define the difference for people listening. A fantasy is something you think about that brings upon arousal. A desire is something that you would like to engage in and enact. And you may not know until you're actually in the situation. But it's always
Good
been something.
distinction.
Thank you. It's always been something that's just come from within me. But as a writer who's written several books, I'm curious about your creative process.
A great question. So there's so many things you said that I want to speak to, but I need to stay on topic. So, which is hard for me sometimes in this space. So my creative process, what I write is I write steamy contemporary romance. I follow the flow, the expected beats. There's certain beats that that we come to expect as romance readers. This is how a romance flows. This is what happens. I write steamy. My books have anywhere from 5 to 7 explicit scenes in them.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people, and I do this, but what I say to people is my sex scenes are a little bit different. I read a lot of research and information by sex experts, and I put real information into the sex scenes.
Love it.
So I have a character actually in my book, Your Turn, where the heroine is a sexual shame culture survivor. The hero, or male MC, he has a giant penis. And if you've read any romance novel, if you've read, say, 10 romance novels, I guarantee you that in one of, and it's a heterosexual couple, one of them, in one of those novels, the man has a giant dick.
Mm-hmm.
And science tells us that women don't really like giant dicks. They hurt. They cause micro tears and abrasions that can increase the transmission of STIs. So many things. Some women even report that a giant penis lowers the sensitivity in their G-spot. So it's actually literally, not only is it painful, it is literally less sexually pleasurable.
Yeah.
Yet you have this rhetoric in the culture about the bigger the penis, the better the man,
Right.
And the bigger the penis, the more you're going to pleasure a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that is bullshit.
Barf.
I mean, it is bullshit. And we spew it all the time. And you have all these men now who feel bad that their penis isn't bigger, and maybe they are struggling to have sex and with a woman, to find a woman to have sex with. Their confidence is shattered. Women have too much control over sex. I need to control women and sex. Oh, let me listen to this podcast, and I'm going to start voting in a way to make sure that women don't control sex in their bodies anymore, that men do. And like, that's bad. So the hero in that book, I say, he has a giant penis, but it's not magical. He has to use lube. They have to go slow. They can't have sex 20 minutes later because she needs to, they can't have penetrative sex 20 minutes later because she needs to recover. So my explicit scenes, while they're full on romance, and the male main characters are super dreamy. Yes, they're good looking. I mean, I have to make them good looking in a certain way, but they don't necessarily have washboard abs, giant dicks, and the man V.
Right.
I try to make them a little bit more like a normal dude who does more than just, sit around all day. Like the normal dude that maybe gets up and takes a walk or works out a couple times a week or something, I try to present them as healthy, and the women as well, healthy in a way, not necessarily trim waist and big boobs, but and some of this stuff that you find in romance novels is based on science. The female brain has certain cues. The male brain has certain cues. I like boobs. She has boobs. Yep, I'm sexually aroused.
Right.
The female brain's a little more complicated. Ooh, I like broad shoulders. He has broad shoulders. Oh, but wait, is he going to use those shoulders to hold me down and hurt me? Or is he going to use those shoulders to protect me? I need more information before I become sexually aroused. So romance novels lean hard into some of those biological cues of, the dude that can protect but not possess, the dude who is, assertive but not aggressive, is strong but not overbearing. Some of those things we really, a lot of romances try to lead into that male main character. And so I do that too. And I try to bring that into the sex scenes. And it's funny, I do get the question, I have had the question, well, are you writing about your husband? And then like my husband has had people ask him like, well, like, is your dick in this? And if you knew my husband, you would know how horrified he would be with that question. But, and the short answer is no, it's fiction. Of course, I'm not writing about him, but my husband is a lovely person.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first book, there are some complications in their sex life, and the man goes off and does research. And that is exactly what my husband did when we were having sexual complications. So that is him. Yes, he shows up in that book a little bit. But other than that, fiction all the way. So I'm writing from my imagination. I'm writing from the sexual health experts, the books that I'm reading, the science I'm reading about what's sexually exciting for females, the female brain. About 80% of romance readers identify as female. So, writing to the audience to a certain extent. But I think the thing that I really try to do is to bring in that real sex representation into sex scenes, because what we're finding is sex education is not working in America. 12 states in America currently don't require sex education to be fact-based. Doesn't have to be based on facts.
Wow.
Let me say that again.
Wow. That's
right.
I remember when the new stuff started coming out for the kids, I don't know, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I emailed the school and I said, I want to see everything that's going to be sent to my child. Not because I wanted to fight with them, but because I wanted to make sure that it was accurate. And I wanted to see where were their gaps, because I want to make sure that my children are well educated. And there were so many people that were freaking out. They were like, this is teaching my child how to have sex. I'm like, good. They should know, because 100%. They're going to do it whether you're wanting them to or not. And so let's let them be educated. And side squirrel note, yesterday we're in the car driving home from my son's practice, and my daughter says, she's talking to her little brother. She's like, I want you to talk to me about blah, blah, blah. She's like, basically sex, drugs, rock and roll. And I looked at her and I was like, what, in what world would a little sibling want to talk to their older sibling about these things? And she's like, well, I know. And so like I rattled off some questions. She's like, those are dumb questions. The first question I asked her was, what's the most common STI? And I was like, girl, I am okay if he wants to come to you and talk to you about, his emotions or his fears or, just experience and like what you've gone through. But if he wants facts, I need him to come to me. I need him to go to the books that I've given him. Right. And so it was just this funny conversation. So sex education is huge, and the lack of it is wild.
39 states, or only 11 states. I'll say that because actually the statistic is only 11 states include consent in their sexual education.
Jesus.
Damn.
Consent.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and what we found, the only thing that the lack of sex education prevents is a lack of healthy sex, a lack of safe sex, and a lack of pleasurable sex. It does not link to a lack of sex. People are going to have sex. So they can either be informed and before they fire a gun, or you can just send them out there locked and loaded and pray that everything works out okay.
Right.
I prefer the former method, of making sure that they know what they're doing. And we had sort of the sex talks with both. I have a boy and a girl, and we had sex talks with them around 14, just sort of saying, okay, I know this is happening in your world. Here's some of our boundaries. Yeah. What you decide to do with your body is your decision within these safe boundaries. So, I just think that it's so important to arm your kids with information. And if you have family values that say, well, I would really like for you to wait until you're married, here's why, do that. But also accept that there's a lot of reasons to not wait to get married to have sex. There's a lot of valid and valuable reasons not to. Sexual compatibility is a thing. And not saying that you couldn't make it work with a partner, but wouldn't you like to know before you made a commitment whether or not you were sexually compatible with the person you're saying you're going to have sex with for the rest of your life?
Well, and there's also like just like you were just referring to, like size dynamics. There's oh, my brain's not gonna let.
Different kinks. Like, what if I was really into something and my husband wasn't?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, then are we going to come up with a situation where I get to experience that with a different partner? Or is this something you can try to do? Fill out those yes, no, maybe lists, which is a list of
the Scarlet Teen has
things.
some. You can Google them. Reach out to me if you need. I've got like 4 different
Google. Yeah, they're everywhere. So fill out a yes, no, maybe list with your partner before you get, at the very least, before you get married to them.
Yeah.
Have those conversations. So,
or like Adam was suggesting earlier in the podcast, just try all the other orifices first.
Try them all. Throw an armpit in there. Why the fuck not?
It's whatever. I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum.
But there are situations where people cause each other infections, and it doesn't mean that there's any diseases involved. It's just there is chemistry that is good to figure out and understand what's happening and being able to work through those things. And
then this is pretty clinical, but just some common knowledge about things. If you are having if you have a condom and you have anal sex and then you want to have vaginal sex, you need to either put on a new condom or if you're not using a condom, then go wash your penis. If it's been in an anus, it shouldn't go in a vagina after that. You need to wash before you do that. This is just like hygiene information, but it can cause infections, urinary tract infections and yeast infections in the vulva owner if you go from anus to vulva directly. So
it's the same thing from mouth. Like there have been so many people that end up with vaginal infections, and it's actually from oral sex because the person's gut hygiene is not what it needs to be.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So being aware of that information is just like, that's just good clinical health. Would I tell my kids not to wash their hands after they go to the bathroom because the bathroom involves their genitals and that's dirty? And no, we shouldn't talk about that.
Right.
Like, no, I don't. Sex education is not helping us. And I think people are looking at other sources. They're looking at porn. They're looking at romance novels. They're looking online. They are going anywhere and everywhere, much younger than we think that they're doing it. The study that I had read when my children were 14 was that at 14, 50% of people 14 years old have had some form of sexual contact. Right. 50% was the statistic that I read. So I was like, 50%, maybe we should have a conversation when they turn 14 about sex, if there's a 50-50 chance that they could be doing this. So, and arguably we probably should have had it sooner, but
well, that's why I love that you're writing factual statements into your novels, right? It's like this is the most recent factual stuff that's out about sexual history, sexual, whatever it is, right? But I do have a question for you, and this might be a playful question, I don't know, but do you write about any parts of that, like the religious upbringing that you've had, some of the struggles that you've gone through? Is that kind of show up in different ways in your books, or even? There's, and I'm not a big religious person. I know what I know, and I barely know that, right? But if I'm not mistaken, there's a big chunk of Jesus's life that's kind of like not talked about in the Bible, right? Right. And that's a lot of that.
From the time he was 12 to the time he was 30.
Right, the sexually active points, right? And so potentially very sexual active during that time. Now, do we just like think that Jesus didn't have sex? He just like vanished into fucking space, and then the aliens brought him back at 32, and he's like all fucking Jesus crossy guy. So my question to you is there an opportunity to write romance Jesus stuff from that age frame?
Oh my God!
There is the Book of Longing, right? The Sue Monk Kid book that came out, a while ago.
And I was just going to say that book,
fantastic book,
and that's fantastic book, and that's the only book I've read on the topic. It's called The Book of Longing.
Why do I not know about this?
It's a fiction book. Susan Monk Kid, right? Did I say that right? It's a fiction book about Jesus got married.
And it's not about Jesus. It's about the woman that married Jesus, and Jesus kind of comes and goes.
Got it.
Yeah, okay. But it is kind of what was her perspective, Jesus's wife, and some people have argued that Jesus was married because it's not mentioned that he wasn't, and it would to be a single man of 30, 33 would be so unusual, especially a man who had a job like carpentry.
Right.
He would be married like that. And so the idea that if he wasn't married, probably reference had been made. That's honestly, I don't care either way. Like part of me is sort of like, that doesn't matter to me. So I'm not going to worry about it. I still think he's a groovy dude. I hope he was married. I hope he had sex, because sex was this gift from his creator. He does say that he's half man. He does say that he is man and God, and that he has said that he experiences all the temptations that men experience. So whatever that is, he said, I know what it's like to be you. So that sort of hints that maybe he did have sex. He did want to have sex, and he did have sex. But whether he had it or not is sort of irrelevant to me.
Right.
So I don't get on it too much. And also it can be fairly inflammatory. Like people are like, oh, what? Jesus was completely pure. He would never do anything. And I kind of want to say, you're telling me more about your sexual feelings than you think you are.
Right.
Like, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, there's an old Chinese proverb that I'll butcher it, but roughly it goes, fish can't swim in clean water. Right. So anybody that's pure, that kind of scares me. I had a boss a long time ago when I was learning how to interview people for management positions. I was like, what should I look for? Should I, nobody that's been fired, obviously. He's like, actually, I would rather hire somebody that's been fired and had to pick themselves back up and show up and prove themselves again, rather than somebody that's never tasted, right? And it's like, the people that I work with in recovery in some kind of way, those are generally some of the most honest and earnest people I've ever met in my entire life.
Yeah, man. Because
they've seen how shitty life can be, and they've chosen to pull themselves out of it, rather than just like, not just, we all have our struggles, right? But, I like somebody with a little dirt on them. I personally appreciate somebody that's got a little fucking scab on their nose, or that's got a little war-torn shit about them. It's like, I can tell you've been through some shit, and you're still got your head up, and that's fucking great, man. And so, I appreciate a lot of that.
Right. And being perfect, that was a big part of my youth,
right?
Of being pure and being perfect and doing everything right. And I've made the statement that when you point a finger at someone, there's one pointing. I mean, I didn't make this up, but there's one pointing at God and there's three pointing back at you.
Yep.
And so that's a tough reality, that when I'm pointing fingers at somebody, I've got three more pointing. Stuff is coming back to me.
Judgments are always a projection. Yeah.
Right. I am not perfect. I am not pure. And I don't need to be. And the struggle to be can, I think, be damaging in and of itself. So I think you're right. I prefer somebody with a little dirt on them.
So I feel like we'll wrap this up in a moment. One thing I want is, I feel like I would end this and feel sad that I didn't at least ask, what is your relationship, or have you dove into the story of Mary Magdalene at all?
I have not dove into her story specifically. I've not read a lot about her. I do know that there are theories. I think for a long time she was considered a prostitute.
Yeah.
And I think there are theories coming out now that is not what she was. Some people have theorized that she was actually Jesus's lover. I don't know that that's really what's coming out. She was definitely an apostle. He refers to her as the most loved apostle. And I didn't make this up either, but there's a tongue-in-cheek statement that only women should preach on Easter, because Mary Magdalene was the only one that recognized him on Easter Sunday. All the others, they thought he was a gardener and they ran away. And so in theory, if she hadn't recognized him, his most beloved apostle, we wouldn't even have the faith. So, so I know that she's important, and I just haven't found myself going down that. But I do think that too, now that we have women who are reading and learning and allowed to speak their minds and opinions about what's happening in the Bible, I think we're going to hear more about Mary Magdalene. But I have not been down that road.
I heard a symbolism for the Last Supper that's representation of Mary Magdalene, because it's the apostles, right? So no women in there, but the way Jesus is sitting with the person right next to him, the way that they're sitting creates an M. And that's like a tip of the hat to Mary Magdalene. Be like, hey, you weren't here, but you really were here. We just can't paint you into this thing.
She was the one behind the camera lens.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Totally.
And like I said, I'm pretty sure that when Jesus referred to, in that case, when Jesus referred to his most beloved apostle, I'm pretty sure he was talking about Mary Magdalene. I might be wrong about that fact, but I do think I wonder if Mary was there. She's just not in the painting, because at the time when the painting was done, that it was unacceptable that women would be that a woman would be a disciple.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe she was there. Oftentimes 12 in Hebrew law and Hebrew stories and the old stories, 12 was representational of a complete set. And so the idea that there was 12 disciples is likely not true. There was probably many more, but the number 12 is used as to say this is the complete set. So it's possible that she was there. She just didn't make it into the painting for reasons that came after her.
Yeah, I love that. Had to ask just because I've got a lot of people, and I've been dabbling and haven't completed reading her story either, but it's been calling me for a long time. I just have to put down all my other like biopsychosocial books to be able to pick something up like that.
Right.
But
yeah, I have to put down all my romance novels. Yeah.
Do you have any? Do you have anything new coming out anytime soon?
I don't actually have anything new coming out soon. I am doing some work on the stuff that I already have published, taking a look at. More accurately, I don't have anything coming out soon. I'm working on a new book. It is a new sub genre, kind of. And maybe not. It's semi-contemporary, but it's new adult. So the characters are in college.
Oh, fun.
And what drew me to that is I've been reading a lot about men and young men and what is going on with young men and what is happening.
Yeah.
That some young men are struggling right now for a variety of reasons. I think young men right now too, they're growing up in a world that their dads told them the world was going to be a certain way, and it is not that way.
Yeah.
And they're trying to navigate. And I think it's so much more different than previous generations, particularly relationships between men and women.
Yeah.
And the rules are kind of out what they thought. And men need to show up more authentically and more vulnerably with their partners. Their partners are expecting that, but men have not been taught how to do that.
Yeah, we just had that talk the other night with my son and I, and exactly that. Like, this is what the world is going to tell you, and this is what you're being presented with, and this is what I want for you. And it was about those things, those qualities, and how what he might need to be able to learn how to embody that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I asked people, Liz Plank and Esther Perel did a thing, and Liz Plank, who's an author, was talking about it in her book, and they asked men, what's the hardest thing about being a man? And most men, they reported, all the different things that men had said. And one of the things that jumped out was the provider expectation. In today's society, one man cannot provide for a family of four. Not really. Not unless, not at special circumstances, right?
Right.
And so I was like, I'm going to ask all the men that I know, what's hard about being a man? And most of them said, it's provider. And even my cardiologist said it.
Yep.
Retired men in my church said it. Young men just going to college said it. This idea that they have to provide, and that is pervasive in our culture too. A woman provides her. A man doesn't provide. What's wrong with him?
Right.
Why isn't he? And so I've been doing a lot of reading and research in sort of masculinity. And the things, masculinity in and of itself is great. The bastardization of it into something toxic is really harmful to both men and women. And so I've been doing a lot of reading about that. And that's inspired me to write novels about a new series where the characters are.
I love that.
In that age group. So
yes, please, more of that, because that is, I mean, I'm 40, almost 46 years old, and it's still something that, as much as I know doesn't need to be part of my narrative, still is, and it's, the way I'm raising my kids and the kids around us, it's still, even though it's not, the permission to cry is there, but the mocking is still there too, so.
Right. It's all, So we as parents are struggling to raise people well, and it's complicated. It's complicated. And so I love to read about all of those things and learn about all of those things and write about them in my stories as much as I can.
Yes, give
Love
us little rule books, give us little handbooks on how to do this stuff. You know, we learn by stories. We're a story-based culture. And that's the reason why we started speaking in the first place, was to share the stories and the narratives so the next generations would be smart, right? And so, like,
You're right.
keep those generations fucking smart, right? Share what you know, right?
That's right. Let's set some real expectations about sex, that guys don't automatically know how to please you. You're going to have to talk to them about what feels good. Don't expect him to just come into the bedroom and make everything magical.
And it's okay when you make mistakes.
Laugh about it. Go on. My latest book, I'll plug my latest book, Hawaii for Two. She struggles to orgasm with a partner. She had some trauma in college, and so she can orgasm when she's masturbating, but she struggles to orgasm with a partner.
So common.
And he doesn't necessarily see it as his problem to solve. You know, culture tells men, if you can't make her come, you're not a man. And sex becomes performative. Women fake it, like all kinds of bad things. And so they have conversations, and, you know, obviously it's a romance. So eventually they reach whatever goal they have set for themselves as a couple, but it doesn't always work magically. And there is this, he has internal conversations. I write dual POV. So you're in her head and his head, and he has sort of conversations in his head about how, no, I need to focus on her pleasure. I need to be there for her. I need to make her feel good. That is what I'm here for, not to necessarily reach some goal. Give me that orgasm, baby. Right. You know, I want it, kind of thing. So.
You can check that box.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Thank you for making it realistic. I goddamn appreciate that. Well, Christina, thank you so much. It's been an honor talking with you. We look forward to having you back on soon. Please, if there's ever an outlet you need to just share more about what you're doing, about this beautiful narratives that you're writing, or, you know, about the messages that you have, please let us know. We'd love to have you back.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. This was such a pleasure and an honor to be here. I love to talk about this stuff, and particularly this angle. I don't often get an opportunity to go this deep into my faith, and it is such an essential part of my life. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll chat soon. Thank you for listening. Remember to like or subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you're listening to. And if you found this episode helpful, please comment or share it with a friend. Check out the show notes for links to get in touch with myself, Awa, or our guest. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. This episode was recorded, edited, and produced by Adam Reel.